Hello Year 3, welcome to week 2 of term 6 maths tutorial. Mr Cottle and I have decided to just swap over roles for this term. So Mr Cottle will be sharing some of the English and the SPAG learning with you, and I will take on the maths tutorials. So I'm really excited about that because I love maths, in particular the subject that we are looking at the moment, which is fractions. I thought it would be a good point in time to just remind you of all of the learning you have done regarding fractions. Lots of people are worried about fractions and think they don't know how to do fractions, but actually fractions aren't tricky. It's just that there's so many things that you can do with them and learn about them. So I think it's really important we do a recap. That's what I'm going to do with you first. And then just a really quick demonstration of some of the things you are going to be learning this week. Most of your lessons this week, in fact I think all of them, are going to be found on BBC Bitesize, the daily lessons, because they are really good quality lessons and they hit exactly what I want you to learn this week. It's going to be all about equivalent fractions, something that you will know a little bit about, but I think that the video tutorials that are on BBC Bitesize are excellent and the activities that go with it are really good as well. So please do the activities and the videos in order if you can each day. You'll find them referenced on the daily learning planner. Okay, so let's get started looking at what we already know. Okay, so let's take a look at this list of things that we have already covered in Year 3. I remember that we covered unit fractions first. Now just a really quick reminder of each of these then. So unit fractions is when we have the number 1 as a numerator. So our numerator is on top of our denominator. Numerator, denominator, and all fractions that have a 1 on top, so one single unit, are referred to as unit fractions. So that could be a half, it could be a third, it could be a tenth, could be a hundredth. Any numerator that's 1 is a unit fraction, which means then that all other fractions are non-unit fractions. So if we have, instead of having 1/3, we might have 2/3. That's a non-unit fraction. We might have 5/7. That's a non-unit fraction. Quite simple and straightforward. We have looked at comparing these fractions. So we know that we can compare unit fractions, for example, because we can put them in order, looking at the denominator to decide which is bigger and which is smaller. The smaller the denominator, the bigger the part. So 1/2 is bigger than 1/3. 1/3 is bigger than 1/10. 1/10 is bigger than 1/100th. So the rule is, when we're with unit fractions, the denominator, the smaller the denominator, the bigger the fraction, the part. If we're comparing fractions with the same denominator, so that would mean that all of our denominators are the same. Let's put some denominators of 10 and we can compare these three. So if I wanted to compare 2/10 with 3/10 and let's say 7/10, the denominator is the same in each. So this time I look at the numerator to tell me which one is the biggest fraction. And in this case it's saying in every time I've shared my whole into 10 parts, for this one I have 2 of those parts, for this one I have 3 of those parts, for this one I have 7 of the tenths, 7 of those parts. So I can see that 7/10 would be my biggest fraction if I'm comparing fractions with the same denominator. You've also done some work this week on finding tenths. Mr Cottle did a brilliant video all about tenths, and we know that if we think about tenths, we can think about a whole and splitting it into 10 equal parts. And so when we talk about 1/10, we're talking about 1 out of those 10 parts. So I can shade one of the 10 parts here to show you. If we're talking about 3/10, I would then be colouring in, shading in 3 of those parts. And it doesn't matter where I choose to shade my part, as long as I only choose to shade 3 to show how many of those parts. We've also done some work on making a whole. That was this week, or last week with Mr. Cottle's tutorial. We were looking at making a whole. So if you have a fraction of 3/5, what would need to go with 3/5 to make one whole? Now, if we're working in fifths, I know then that my whole would be 5 of those fifths, 5/5. So what goes with 3/5 to make 5/5? The answer is 2/5. And of course that builds in nicely with something else we worked on last term, I think, and we've had a quick recap on it. Adding fractions and subtracting fractions. So adding fractions, we've already done it here. We know that if we've got 3/5, we needed to make 5/5. We needed to therefore add 2/5. So 3/5 add 2/5 equals 5/5. So when we're adding fractions, when our denominators are the same, we simply add our numerator to find our total. Likewise, if we're subtracting fractions with the same denominator, we may have had 3/5 take away 2/5. What are we left with? Well, I had 3 of those fifths. I've had to take away 2 of those fifths. That has left me with 1 of those fifths. And it really is all about the numerator. 3 of them, take away 2 of them, leaves me with 1 of them. And what are we talking about? We're talking about fifths. Okay, you've also done some work, a little bit trickier, finding fractions of an amount. I say it's a bit trickier because it relies on our multiplication and division skills. So if you are finding, for example, a quarter of 12. So we're finding a fraction of a number, a fraction of an amount. How do we find a quarter of 12? It's all about the denominator, and we need to think about dividing. So we look at our amount. We look at how many parts we're sharing it into. We want to find 1/4 of 12. So it actually is the same as saying that's 12 divided by 4, which of course is 3. Therefore, 1/4 of 12 is 3. And as a challenge last week, you were asked perhaps to think about finding 2/4 of 12. To find 2/4 or more than a unit fraction of an amount, you do need to find the unit fraction. So I need to go back to what I did here, share my 12 into 4 to find one amount. So 12 divided by 4 gives me 3. That's 1/4 of 12. So 2/4 of 12 must be 2 lots of my 3. So 6. It's quite a lot that we've done on fractions, but it does all build on each other. So that's why I wanted to do a recap with you of what we have done so far, just to remind you how much you know, how much you've learnt, and therefore we can build on that this week. This week we're going to be looking at equivalent fractions. That means, the word equivalent means the same. So your tutorials, your videos, your activities that you're going to be doing for maths this week really are all about finding, they're different fractions but they're showing the same amount. So we'll take a quick look now at what that means. Okay, Year 3s, let's look at our learning this week, building on all of that lovely stuff we've already done. So, equivalent fractions. This is going to look very similar to the video you have on Monday's BBC Bite Size Daily Maths lesson. And you can see that we're looking at shapes. First of all, fractions of shapes. And our triangle in the beginning here, we've got half of it has been shaded. Half of my triangle is shaded. I want to do the equivalent or show the equivalent fraction on my next shape. My next shape is a square which has been split or shared into 4 equal amounts. So that means that my fraction is going to be something over 4. So depending on how many of these quarters that I shade in, that will decide on my numerator. Now I want to do the same amount as what I have done in this fraction here. I want to actually shade in half. Now I know that to shade in half then, I need to do this one and that one. So I'm actually shading in 2 parts this time, but because my parts are smaller, 2 of them still make a half. So 2 of my quarters is the same as 1/2. Let's look at this third shape. So this is a hexagon. I want to do the same thing again, but you can see that it's been split into 6 parts. My denominator will be a 6 then. But how many of those parts do I need to shade in to make it an equivalent fraction to this one and this one? Well, let's have a go. If I shade that one, that's 1 of my 6, 2 of my 6, 3 of my 6. You can see visually that I have shaded in 1/2 of my shape. How many parts of those 6? 3 of them. So 3/6 is the same as 2 quarters and 1/2. Okay, now let's show those same fractions, equivalent fractions, on a fraction wall. So here we have 3 strips, and you can see I've marked here that the full length represents 1 whole. So if I take my first strip, I want to show half. So 1 of my 2 parts I will shade. So I need to split this. I'm going to show it as a fraction here, 1/2. So I need to split my whole strip into 2 parts. So, and please excuse the fact that I might not be accurate because I don't have a ruler to show you today. However, when we are talking fractions, it is important that you are accurate because every part of a fraction has to be equal. So I'm doing best guess here just to show you on the video, but I think I've split it fairly equally into 2 parts here, and I can shade in 1 of my 2 parts. The second strip I want to represent 2 quarters. So that means that I will share that into 4 equal parts. Probably the easiest way for me to do that is to just draw my lines. They look fairly equal. I'm quite pleased with that. Okay, I need to shade in 2 of those 4 parts to make it an equivalent fraction to 1/2. Let's do it. There's 1 of my quarters, 2 of my quarters. Hopefully you can see how 2 of the quarters is the same as 1/2. And then let's take a look at our third fraction. So I've got my third strip here on my fraction wall, and I want to show 3/6 this time. So I need to split my wall, my strip, into 6. That's going to be a bit trickier, but I think I can do it. Let's see if I can split it equally by eye. So I think that would be 3, 4, 5. Okay. Oops. Something like that. I'm just going to check that I've got this right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I needed it split into 6. Correct. How many of those 6 do I need to shade in to have an equivalent to 2 quarters and 1/2? Hopefully you can see. I need to shade this one. That's 1 of my 6, 2 of my 6, 3 of my 6, and as you can see, I've now shaded half of my strip, half of my line. I hope you can see then how a fraction wall can be useful, because you can see each strip and the parts that it has been cut into or shared into, which tells us our denominator, and then depending on how many of those parts we have shaded in is what we show with our numerator. Okay, let's take a look at something you'll be doing on some of your worksheets, and that is using a number line to show your fractions. So you might be able to take a quick count and work out that I have shared my number line into 6 equal parts. That's important that you do that to begin with, to work out the denominator for the fraction that's being shown. So I have, if I label this as being 1, this is one whole amount, just like our wall up here. And I have shared it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 equal parts. So my one whole is the same as 6 out of my 6 parts. So the question is, can I label these points here? The answer is I can, because I can just work out how far along the number line it goes. So if I needed to know what to label this line here as on my number line, I've already worked out that I'm dealing with 6, because I know that there are 6 equal parts on my number line to make it to one whole. How many of those 6 have I got across? I've got 1, 2, 3. This is 3, 6. Can I label this one? Yes, I can, because I can just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This must be 5, 6. And so I could label them all, couldn't I? This is going to be 0. I can then go on to say this is 1, 6, 2, 6, and this is 4, 6. Okay, so I can just double check that they all make sense. 1, 6, 2, 6, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 6, that is a whole. My number line makes sense. Have a really good go with your work this week. Remember all that brilliant learning you've done. You should be fine. Okay, year 3s, I know this one was a biggie. It was always going to be a biggie because fractions are a biggie. There's so much to learn and know about fractions, and it will prepare you really nicely for when you move on through school. And so it's really important it makes sense to you. So go back, use BBC Bite Size. It's got some brilliant stuff on it. It should make sense to you. If you're really stuck, send a message through your home learning to either Mr. Cottle or to myself. It will get to us and we'll see if we can help you. Okay, good luck with it all and have a great week. I'll see you next time. Bye.